Bueno, como les decíamos, tenemos una nueva conferencia que será en inglés y que está presentada por Algorand, BlockData, Big Investments in Blockchain. Esta conferencia, como les decía, va a ser en idioma inglés, pero voy a hacer una pequeña presentación en español y luego pasamos al inglés. El speaker, ahora sí, se complica a esta hora de la mañana, el speaker es Jonathan Nettle. Él es británico, vive actualmente en Holanda, así que vamos a tener contacto desde Ámsterdam. Es cofundador y GM de BlockData, se confiesa fascinado por las posibilidades de blockchain y se ha involucrado en startups durante toda su trayectoria, ayudando a otras personas a crecer aplicando esta revolucionaria tecnología del blockchain. Así que vamos a hacer también la presentación en inglés. I will introduce Jonathan Nettle. He's British, but now he's living in Amsterdam. Jonathan is co-founder and GM BlockData. He's fascinated by the possibilities of blockchain and the idea of shared sources of truth since 2013. Having been involved with startups his entire career, he founded BlockData to help other people track the growth and application of this revolutionary technology. In 2020, BlockData was acquired by CB Insights to help them educate their corporate audience and on the possibilities of blockchain technology. So, Jonathan, welcome to this Blockchain Summit Global. How are you?
Thank you very much. Very, very well, and very much looking forward to sharing some of our insights today.
Well, we are very happy to have you here, and we have here Nacho. Nacho is one of the organizers of this blockchain summit, and you know very well each other, so you can speak together.
Hey.
Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
Hi, all is well, all is well. How about yourself?
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for being here. It's an honor and a pleasure for us. I'm really excited about your presentation. It's over a year that it's the first presentation in over a year, right?
Yes, I'm very much looking forward to it because I haven't presented for quite a while.
You are great. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Well, thanks a lot for putting it on. I guess I'll take it away.
Thank you. Okay.
Well, we are ready to listen to you, Jonathan.
Super. Well, thanks a lot, everybody who's listening, and thanks a lot to the organizers for putting this event on. I'm going to be sharing some insights on the investments and also the maturing use cases. That is where I am going to be sharing a lot of data and a lot of information, but all of the research that I'm going to be showing you is available online, so you can take your own time to kind of go through it and take your own learnings at your own pace. So yeah, I'm just going to, if we can pull up the screen, super. Well, first of all, taking a very high-level zoom out at what's going on with blockchain, it's important to remember that blockchain is a new type of data infrastructure. And what that means is it's going to take a long time for this technology to really be adopted and integrated into the world. But it forms this data utility layer to how companies and people can interact. But what I can certainly say is that the future will be built on blockchain or some form of variations of blockchain. And that is because of all the benefits that it brings. And that is where it's important to realize that every transaction has two sides. There is the payment of the transactions as well as the delivery of that information or that service. And the reason why I mention this is as more and more solutions come online, the adoption of this technology is going to become exponential. And that's really exciting because we're actually, despite it being 2021 and blockchain as an idea being over 10 years old now, we're still early. And this data layer is going to enable single sources of truth rather than every company having their own data source. And most importantly, create programmable assets, which will open up new types of financial assets and many others in the future. Now, that is where what's interesting is that not very often is there a technology revolution and a financial revolution that happens at the same time. And currently we're in what is arguably the fifth big technical and financial revolution. And we're now moving to a point where we're getting into this synergy phase of the technology. This is an idea brought by somebody called Carlota Perez, and there's a source link where you can also learn more about this. But what I'm trying to get at is it's a very exciting time. And what's important to note, and that's where we're going to go into the investments and the use cases, is that what we're currently in is a migration of assets. So that is where lots of assets are stored on traditional infrastructure right now, the traditional capital markets. And what we're seeing is these blockchain-based assets are starting to increase. And so this is what's going to happen is soon, we can't say when, it could be 5 years, 10 years, is we're going to have this flippening where more assets are going to be running on blockchain-based infrastructure than the traditional infrastructure. And the last thing I wanted to note as a little bit of context is that lots of people always think blockchain is Bitcoin and Bitcoin is crypto, and that's what it's all about. But what we're starting to see also with a lot of the investments is they're moving away from the layer ones or the blockchains themselves and focusing a little bit more on the applications of the technology and also the supporting services around the ecosystem. Now, why I mention this is and why the size is very important is there are quite a lot of blockchains, but there are many more applications, and there are increasingly so many more supporting services and things that are integrating these blockchain solutions. So anyway, to the topic of the talk, 4 key funding trends that are showing the ecosystem growth. The first big stat that I have for you is that 55 of the top 100 banks by assets under management are now investing in either crypto or blockchain technology. So that is now over half, which is actually a pretty significant progress since, a couple of years ago where people were saying, Bitcoin, blockchain, that's bad. And we have very big names like BNY Mellon, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, ING, BBVA, where they're not just investing in one company, but they're investing in multiple. And this is very important because they are now realizing that this blockchain infrastructure is going to be a core part of their strategy moving forward and should make us all go, yay, they're actually coming on board. And here are some of the companies that they've actually invested in, and we're going to be deep diving into some of the areas that they're currently investing. The second stat that is of relevance is that the size of the funding rounds are getting bigger and bigger. So these are some of the biggest rounds that we've seen so far in blockchain investments, where we've got things like custody, we have mining companies, we've got BlockFi with lending, FTX obviously being a big exchange. But that is where in August 2021 alone, we've had 4 what we would call mega rounds or big rounds of 263 million to Bitpanda, 210 million to Blockstream, 120 million to TaxBit, which I want to point out is really one of those service providers because they're providing the services for compliance and tax, as well as Coindex with 90 million. So to a traditional investor, what this means is that the actual integration of the technology, but also the maturity of the technology is getting to a point where you can no longer ignore this ecosystem and what's going on. The third big stat that I wanted to share is if we take the world's top 20 VCs by size, 14 of them, which is 70%, have already invested in blockchain technologies. Half of those have invested in crypto exchanges. Now, crypto exchanges is relevant because that is actually the on-ramp that a lot of the retail users, a lot of the consumers take to enter into the blockchain universe or the crypto universe. But the next big one here is that these VCs have raised an amount of these big blockchain companies that these VCs have invested in have received a total collective funding of $8.6 billion, which again, 5 years ago, if people would have been saying these sorts of numbers, they would have said, crypto and Bitcoin, that's a joke. But no, these numbers are showing that it's real and it's really happening, and that there is the real traction to back up these types of investments. And this is the stat that I think we should all really, really be paying it to, particularly moving into the second half of 2021. What you can see here is that the amount of funding per year done by VCs into blockchain and crypto technology. But what we can see here, and this was done at the beginning of July, is that already this year, we've had over $7 billion worth of investments in total around the world in this technology. And this is more so than any other year in recorded history so far in this ecosystem. So not only when we're talking about the growth of crypto and the prices of crypto, but this is another proof point that we are entering into a new era of the ecosystem. This light blue box here representing a potential growth for the rest of the year if this cycle currently continues all the way through into next year. So fingers crossed. The next big thing that I wanted to mention here is the actual amount of deals, 404 compared to 855, is again showing that there might be less deals, but the amount of money that is being put into these companies is increasing per round, referencing the previous stats that I've just brought up. Again, another signal of the maturing ecosystem. So that is very, very high level talking about VC investments. But where is that money actually going? And what are the types of structures and ecosystem structures that are now coming into place? So the first one, now I know that this is a lot of data, and that is why I mentioned at the beginning that you can have a look at this in your own time. But I want to try and point out a couple of key things here. So if this works and I can draw a line down the middle, if we look at this red line here, we can see that there is two distinct ecosystems developing in the applications of blockchain in stable coins and central bank digital currencies, where the central bank digital currencies are being run by obviously central banks that are using permissioned infrastructure. So those are forms of private blockchains. And these are being applied behind the scenes in large financial institutions who are using them for wholesale payments. Now, wholesale payments does not mean $10. Wholesale payments means $10 billion. So that is where these are the applications that are looking to move large amounts of money and utilizing blockchain technology for that. Whereas on the other side, what we see here is the public infrastructure, which is being used for stable coins, where now we start to see large merchants actually looking to integrate the stable coins into their payments, as well as more crypto native companies like Circle, Utrust, or Coinbase even, who are looking to accept crypto or stable coins as a form of payment next to things like the dollar, the euro, etc. And here are some key things, and the dates is what's important in this chart. So here, or in this graphic, so here we can see PayPal making moves in April 2021, Visa 2021 as well, 2021, 2021, 2021. And so these are big names that are household names and power a lot of the traditional economy, are also still, are now this year taking this technology more and more seriously as it gets more mature. Now, this is something that is applicable everywhere around the world and is thinking about, okay, well, now a company that could even be the baker on your street corner can now decide they want to adopt stable coins, and they have to start to choose what stable coins may I want to accept, which merchant payment providers can I potentially use that accept that stable coin, how can I do my accounting and my taxes using stable coins? Because that has been one of the hurdles of adoption so far. And the last point is, how can I actually earn interest on my stable coins, just like I would do in a traditional bank account? And that last part being very, very important, because if you have your money in a bank account, you're not going to get a lot of interest in 2021. Or here in Europe, you may have negative interest rates where they're going to take your money. But now having this all included in one big ecosystem, that where everything is starting to become interconnected and once again mature, it starts to get to a point where companies can actually start to use this as a main form of payment. And we're starting to see that happen, where, for example, with Gilded, a tax accounting tool, they're starting to see a significant increase in companies that are using stable coins as a primary method of payment. Now, stable coins is one aspect. But the other aspect is the traditional capital markets, which is what powers the trading of things like equities, bonds, loans, things like this, that has, been a financial system that has developed over the last, 200 years, arguably. But the cost of entering into capital markets in the traditional world has always been very, very high. And that is because the process of tokenizing an asset and representing it inside a system is expensive. There's a lot of paperwork involved. Then how do you trade that asset on another exchange? And how do you also service that asset once it's been traded so you can continue to make sure that you have that asset properly managed? And what I'm trying to get across and what BlockData is trying to show with this graph is that we have a couple different companies are trying to integrate either the whole solution end to end, or they're trying to focus on the primary and secondary trading of such assets, or they're taking a focus on a particular area, be that just secondary trading. Now, what's interesting about this secondary section that we made here is these are traditional financial players like the Börse Stuttgart, the London Stock Exchange, Broadridge, or SGX that are actually now using distributed ledger technology or piloting this technology to see how it could save them costs in the future. And that brings us to the big topic of why blockchain is not just applicable for cryptocurrencies, but also large other parts of the financial ecosystem, is the fact that it can actually, over the next 10 years, bring a significant cost savings for these organizations and actually a simplification of how the global economy functions. Now, those two ecosystems that I just showed you are actually quite mature already. The stable coins, the CBDCs, that is a process that's going on. But there are also other ecosystems that are also maturing at quite a fast pace. And this is going to enable this next big wave of institutional adoption to come to fruition. So the first one, and this is a diagram that is unreleased, and we're going to be releasing it, so it's still a little bit of a draft, but I definitely wanted to provide it in this presentation today. And the main section is actually this section, where what we're starting to see is that in the DeFi space, you have this true decentralized ecosystem where anybody from anywhere in the world can earn yield on their assets and earn that interest. But what's happened and what we've seen is a lot of large institutions and a lot of large companies have been knocking on the door, literally, well, over email, and saying, hey, we want to put our assets also into these forms of these DEXs and DeFi protocols. But because they're completely public, it's very hard for us to do compliance and to adhere to our local regulations. So what we're now starting to see is that there is a new generation of DeFi protocols that are coming out that are allowing traditional institutions to enter into the ecosystem and enter into effectively compliant DeFi products. Now, what's interesting about that is currently, the DeFi ecosystem sits at around a total value that's locked in it at around $80 billion, depending on the numbers that you look at on the day. But the institutions could be bringing at least another 300 to, by some estimates, to maybe another $1 trillion worth of money into this ecosystem once these protocols become more mature and they release their products into the mainstream. But to be able to do that, they also have to be able to make sure that their assets are secured. So here we're talking a little bit about the custody. And that is where we're seeing different flavors of custody providers that are coming to market. Be them, they're providing retail technology to retail providers and banks like Revolut, or they're providing institutional technology with higher levels of securities to be able to allow and enable more larger financial institutions that are regulated custodians of the technology to be able to provide services to their institutional and corporate clients. Again, this is the type of movements and the maturity that we need to be seeing in the technology and the ecosystem to allow the large amounts of institutional capital to move into crypto and blockchain. But also every single company that uses blockchain will also need to make sure that they custody their assets, because you don't want to lose the stuff that's yours. Nobody wants that. The next one that we see is growing in maturity is the fact that still in 2021 there is around 9% of all remittance transfers are still paid in fees, which for a lot of families around the world who rely on remittance is still a lot of money. So that is where these services that are currently, going to market and are becoming, again, a little bit more mature, are using blockchain infrastructure to reduce that amount of fees to enable families around the world to not pay so many to a large institution that arguably already has enough money. So we're definitely seeing disruption here, and are going to be watching this over the next, couple of years to see how this plays out. One of the big things that happened a few years ago, especially after the ICO boom, was how could we tokenize real estate or securities? And what we're now starting to see, and we've heard from industry sources, that actually by the end of this year, it should be reasonable to expect that $300 million plus of actual real estate should start to become tokenized within traditional real estate funds as well as property providers. Now, going back to that exponential point that I was saying earlier, this technology has taken 3 years to get to a point where the industry can actually start rolling it out to, let's say, the mainstream. And as more and more people do it, and as larger real estate funds and maybe individual real estate investors, using this technology will allow them to reduce the costs of servicing and financing real estate, hopefully around the world, and also across borders. And this example here of something that is also becoming more mature is the fact that companies are starting to use blockchain to be able to fight climate change. So this was a topic that actually my girlfriend ended up writing her thesis on, but is now we've seen, because we did research recently, where we can see that these companies are starting to track things like carbon credits, create marketplaces. And the reason why blockchain, again, is suitable for these types of use cases is the fact that it can majorly reduce the costs of administrating these assets and making it simpler for people to understand. So that's all the data that I have for you. And I know that I went pretty quickly, but I hope that this presentation has provided all of the listeners today with that confidence to go home or go and tell your family that blockchain adoption is not a joke and it's maturing, and the time to be a part of this ecosystem and start to work on the solutions is now. I think a couple of areas that we are watching is DAOs and the maturing governance is very, very interesting to watch right now of what we're seeing, as well as how that intersects with NFTs. Companies are adopting private blockchains and they're moving them from pilot into production. That's okay. We know that it takes a long time, but the fact that that is starting to happen is a great moment for the ecosystem. Also to keep a lookout for is government initiatives. Here in Europe, there is something called the European Blockchain Services Infrastructure, where they're actually trying to get all the member states to have a unified infrastructure to support blockchain adoption and create these single sources of truth to prepare us for the next evolution of digital identity and the digital age. But also the fact when it comes to inflation and the meta economics of what's going on around the world, this is one of the reasons why crypto adoption right now is so interesting, is because it sits outside of the traditional economy. And one big one is also going to be decentralized identity and how that integrates with the DeFi ecosystem and other blockchain solutions. So the last thing I wanted to say is, if you're building blockchain, come and be a part of the BlockData ecosystem. We want to include you in our market maps. And also there's a QR code down here so you can also view all of our research. I hope that was informative, and I hope everybody got something out of it. Thanks ever so much, everyone.